On the molecular relationship. And we were talking about how creation began. Creation began with, everything began with cause and effect. Cause and effect and intelligence is like the chicken and the egg. You say, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, it's like they both almost had to come at the same time. And cause and effect and eternal intelligence is similar because intelligence is produced by the interplay of cause and effect. And so these are two eternal things that exist in the eternal world, is intelligence and cause and effect. And this produced, when it was decided by intelligence to produce physical form, everything was generated by a wavelength. And as we look closer and deeper in the matter, that's all they can find is wavelengths. They haven't found anything physical yet. They haven't found anything solid. All they have found is wavelengths. And I don't know why it didn't occur to scientists a long time ago that that's all there is wavelengths. Wavelengths makes everything there is. And the interesting part about it is when creation began, it began with the smallest things that we can possibly imagine, much smaller than atoms. And creation began with forming very small particles and combining the particles and making bigger particles until we finally have the atom. Now, the one thing that scientists got right about the Big Bang, they say that the first second of the Big Bang, just all kinds of things happened. There was creation like you wouldn't believe. But one thing that hasn't seemed to occur to the scientists was that intelligence was involved, and that intelligence went through a very long cycle, which would be to us like trillions of years. Trillions of years in that 1 second of the Big Bang, in other words. Because what is time? What is time? That's an important question to ask. Anybody got an idea as to how to define what time is and what makes time? We talk about the state of timelessness and then a state where there is time, but what is time?
Well, it seems it's the movement of particles, the movement of form in relation to existence.
Right. In other words, if everything in this world we're in now went twice as fast, if all the clocks moved twice as fast, then time would be moving twice as fast. So time is related to motion from one point to another as it registers in consciousness, okay? So if we were going to go down to the atom, in the atom right now, according to our consciousness, the electron circles around the atoms trillions of times in 1 second. But let's suppose we went down there in the atom and we slowed down our consciousness or sped it up, whatever modem you want to look at here, to the point that we could perceive the electron moving slower. So it's like a planet where our planet moves around the sun, takes a whole year to move around once. The electron moves around the atom very quickly. But let's suppose we slowed it down to where it took a whole year for the electron to circle around the nucleus of an atom. Okay, then if we measure time according to our consciousness from one point to another, the way we measure the earth moving from one point to another, then time would function at an entirely different level. So it's like the scientists say during that first second of the Big Bang, they have calculated that just like what you would say trillions of years of evolution took place. And they can't understand how in the world creation happened in such a way that everything that manifested was in such perfect balance that everything just worked. That's one thing that's really mysterious to scientists that have explored the Big Bang and creation and physics and everything. How in the world is it, for instance, that the charge of an electron is exactly the opposite of the charge of a proton, and just everything functions, and there's more of one type of charge in the universe than another, so just the right amount to make physical matter appear that it is as it is and stay stable. For some reason, it doesn't occur to them that there was intelligence involved in the whole thing. They think, well, it just happened. It was one chance in trillions that it could happen, and we just lucked out because our universe materialized the way that it is, just because we just had good luck. Okay, but that's not the way it was. There's intelligence, high intelligence, beyond what we can even imagine, that was involved in creation in that 1 second that the scientists talked about, that really lasted trillions of years, that consciousness went through, because consciousness was on a different time level or time frame than our time frame or time dimension, or whatever we want to call it. So in the beginning of creation of physical form, then, we went through a whole universe of creation, of beginnings and endings, many times over, until we were able to perfect the atom, the quarks, the protons, the neutrons, the electrons. We got all those perfected. They didn't get perfected by themselves. It took all the intelligence that the life of God could muster up to make everything work. And then when it got one atom, one hydrogen atom that worked, it duplicated it. And that's why all throughout the universe, there's hydrogen atoms all over the place. There's helium atoms all over the place, oxygen atoms all over the universe. So they all throughout the universe. Once that perfection had occurred in the microcosmic world, the intelligence, higher intelligence, just used it everywhere, because that worked better than anything. So they use the same intelligence and power of creation in our solar system as on Sirius, as in our galaxy, as in the Andromeda galaxy, as in our part of the universe to another part of the universe. We all use the same principles of creation, because the intelligence, which is God, figured out what works and what doesn't work. And when we figure out what works and what doesn't work, then we begin to use what works. For instance, the intelligence that goes into making a computer, the principles that's discovered is used by everybody that makes computers, uses basically the same principles, a little bit different designs, but the same principles involved. Once Edison invented the light bulb, well, Americans made the same light bulb that the English made, that the Germans made, that the Russians made. Everybody used the same principle until a better light bulb was made. Then now they got the LED bulbs, everybody's switching over to them because they take less power, and they last longer. And so when there's an improvement, everybody switches over. And this is what the life of God did when he created the smallest parts of the universe to the bigger parts is when the intelligence, the higher intelligence, finds something that works. Then he keeps using it unless something better comes along. But until something better comes along, then he uses it. So the principle that has created the atom, the quarks, the protons, neutrons, they're the same throughout the whole universe, because in creating matter, it is what works best, the way it's put together. So we go land on the moon, they got the same elements that we have here, a little bit different assortment maybe, but the elements are still the same. And the same will happen when we go to another star system. But we're able to analyze light from galaxies billions of miles away, and we can tell what elements are in or there because of the light that we take in. So we have found out that the same building blocks are used everywhere in the universe. Everything's just put together a little bit different way. Just like same principles create our bodies, but each one of us looks a little different. Not all of us can look as handsome as old Ed over here, but we all we all plug along and make the best of what we got. And we all operate on basically the same principles. Okay, so time is caused by motion. And the perception of motion from one point to another determines how fast the time goes by. If we increase change our consciousness, we can actually change our perception of time. There is a theory that your time is measured by your heartbeat. I think we talked about that last week, that you speed up your heartbeat, you do exercise, and time seems to go slower. And you relax, and time seems to go faster. Because time, that, like I say, that's one theory, is that it's adjusted to your heartbeat. And I think there's something to that. I don't know if it's 100% accurate, but I think it's there is something to it.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, if you're having fun, if you take your attention off of time because you're having fun, then it seems to go faster. Like they say, a watched pot never boils, and certain amount of truth to that. If you're really paying attention to the passage of time, it seems to go slower. It doesn't really go slower. It's just that you're not, if you're not paying attention to it because you're having fun, then time, you're just not keeping track. So it doesn't matter how much time passes. So I don't think it changes the speed of time so much as your consciousness just doesn't mind if time goes fast or slow, if you're having a good time. Now, here's another question. We keep talking about, and a lot of people talk about experiences where they entered a timeless state, and many teachers have said that in the higher consciousness, there is no time. What do you think that would be like, to be in a state of consciousness where there's no time? What would cause that?
Well,
There's no matter.
one thing that's been said was that time is the separation of events. So I guess it might be sort of like the possibility that unfolded all events is what you're aware of versus isolated potential events on a lower level.
Yeah. Now, some people think that in the next world after we die, we'll be in a timeless state, but I don't think it's timeless in the world of the soul, because there's still some form involved, and there's events that take place there. In the three worlds of form, which is the physical, the astral, the emotional, and the mental, there is form in all these three worlds. Where you enter the true state of timelessness is where you go beyond form. Then you're in a timeless state. Okay. Now, why do people think that when they like have a near-death experience, they were in a state of timelessness? And my theory on this is that it's not really pure timelessness in the regular after-death state. It's just a different state that seems timeless because there's like no night and day, and you don't have a care about time like you do here. We have a lot of cares about time. We set our alarm clock to get up a certain time. We have to go to work at a certain time. We watch TV shows a certain time. And in the altered state, in the afterlife, these things don't apply. So it seems like there is no time. Yet there is still a time, but it's not. We don't pay much attention to time. There is why it feels timeless. Whereas here we pay a lot of attention to time. Now, DK kind of affirms this because he says that one of the disadvantages of our population growth is that it draws people into incarnation before they have enough time to contemplate the lessons of the last life. So he talks about the importance of taking the time between lives to contemplate and absorb the lessons before you're born again in another life. So if he's correct on this, even though he talks about timelessness too, the afterlife isn't completely timeless because we need time to absorb the lesson between lives before we're born again. Because that state is not entirely formless. We can manifest form there, or we can use form. We can have events there. As long as you have two events, and you proceed from one event to another, there is still time. But in the different planes, time is seen from a different perspective. Because in the afterlife situation, the entity never feels rushed. In this situation, where now we feel rushed, we feel pressed, we got to meet a certain schedule, but you don't have that pressure in the afterlife. It seems like you have forever to do anything that you want to do. And so it's a state that many have called timeless, but I don't believe it is quite timeless. But there is a timeless state. And the timeless state is where we go into the higher worlds. And Adam pointed out on his post about the 7 different planes. So we'll go through those about that'll help us to, and going through these will help us to understand time and timelessness. Okay, the first plane is the physical. It's called the physical etheric. So we see the physical here amongst us right now, and then, but this is what we see is actually the shadow of the true physical. The true physical is your etheric body. And we talked about how to see that in various lessons of the past, so we won't go through that again, but anybody can learn to see it in about 5 minutes. And so it's interesting. The physical etheric is the first plane, and time as we understand it is happening here. The second plane up is the astral. And everybody admits astral exists because the astral is the emotional plane. So everybody, even the hard atheist scientist, has to admit that even though he can't see them, emotions are real. We really feel stuff. We feel anger, hate, love, joy. All these feelings are experienced through the astral plane. The astral plane is here with us right now. Everybody here is advanced enough to be in touch with certain parts of your emotions. So we all know the astral plane is real. And time functions a little bit different on this astral plane. And in the astral plane, it's still it's one of the worlds of form. The next plane up is the mind. And in the mind, we know the mind is real because we think. So again, this is a plane that even the hardened scientist has to acknowledge the effects of exist, because we all know that we think. And we have minds and we can reason. And so there's a plane of mind that is acknowledged by everybody. These three planes are acknowledged by everybody, but what's unacknowledged is that in the astral and mental planes, there's actually matter that actually creates form that we can't see with our physical eyes, can't see normally with our physical eyes, okay? And now in the spirit world, it's created from the higher subplanes of the mental plane, which is still a world of form. So in the spirit world, we can still use form if we desire, or you can just be a ball of fire if you want to appear that way. But you are capable of manifesting and living in form if according to your desires there. Okay, so the next step up is intuitive plane. And so what's the what is the intuitive plane?
The world of ideas,
Close.
the soul.
Close. It's yeah, the soul is in contact with the intuitive plane, but the world of ideas is the atmic plane. Okay,
Oh.
that's the above the intuitive plane. So what does the intuitive plane do?
The world of
So we have the
But
world
like I
of
said,
they have the world ideas in the atmic plane. That's where the ideas are.
What about
I
creativity?
thought DK had said something about the Buddhic plane having to do with the world of ideas.
where you bring it down, maybe.
Right, right. The intuitive plane is the plane that transmits the ideas. Okay. Okay, it is true you access ideas through the intuitive plane, but the ideas actually originate in the atmic plane. Okay, so it's like the intuitive plane uses like soul energy to bring down an idea from the atmic plane down to the mental plane, and then to the brain, hopefully, if we're lucky. So if you get a flash of inspiration, that is your intuitive, you've reached an intuitive plane, which has accessed the atmic plane and brought you down a flash of inspiration. And so you have kind of several planes that work here. When you get a flash of inspiration, you got a number of planes that work. You got the atmic plane is accessed by your intuitive self. It brings it down and projects it into the mind. And then the mind projects it into the brain. And it doesn't always reach the brain. Sometimes you feel a little inspired and you don't, and all of a sudden it's gone. You weren't able to quite get the whole picture. But if you get pretty much a decent picture of it, that means the transmission was successful. And this is what disciples really want to seek to accomplish, is to have that access. And now that access takes the key is contemplation, meditation, focus on seed thoughts, on ideas. And if you do it enough, you create a point of tension to bring that down. Okay, so the next step up is the intuitive plane, and then the atmic plane where the ideas are. And the next step up is the monad, and that's where the point of life originates for this cycle for us. I mean, that's where, and then the monad exists in divine space. It's called the divine plane. It's known by a number of names, but in the divine plane, think of that's a correspondence to physical space. Look up at night at space, and how many spaces are there? Just one space. But you don't look at space and say, oh, I see spaces up there. No, you look up there and you say, I see space. And in space, I see a bunch of twinkling stars, okay? And in divine space, it's a higher correspondence of this physical space that we see. It's one space representing the one life of God, and appearing in that space is points of intelligence, which are the monads of you and me. And our original points are still up there. We have our original intelligence still dwelling in the bosom of God in that divine space. And our monad projected itself down into the kingdom of the soul and produced our soul, which is a reflection of the monad. And the soul dwells in higher mental matter. And then our soul projected itself down here to us. So the monad didn't project its whole self into the soul. It partially projected itself, okay? And then our soul partially projected itself down to us. So our soul is a lot more intelligent, has a lot more intelligence than we do. And our monad has a lot more intelligence than the soul. So we're getting kind of the short end of the stick down here. And it's a little bit like when you have a dream, your full intelligence is not in the dream. You don't even know that you have any power of decision to decide to have any control of the dream. You don't have much control there unless you're a really experienced vivid dreamer of some type. But the same thing here. We don't have the intelligence of our soul. But when we wake from a dream, we are still realize we're us. We don't lose our identity when we wake from a dream. We find we are more than we thought we were when we were dreaming. And the same thing at death. When we reunite with our soul, it'll be like an awakening. It won't be like we lost anything. When you wake up from a dream, you don't feel like you lost anything. Okay, when you wake up from this life, you will not feel like you've lost anything, but you've gained. So you've gained because you've gone back closer to your source, and you will have more intelligence, more vision, more seership. Now, speaking of time, now in the higher world where there is ideas, okay, the reason it's called timeless, well, let me put that out to you. What is the reason? What would it be like if you're up in the world, atmic world, where it's supposed to be a timeless state? Why would it be timeless?
Probably
0 point energy, no duality.
Yeah.
JJ, wouldn't it be relative to the vibration? So the bigger the vibration, the deeper we go in the kingdoms down to the physical, the more the more we notice the time passage, because that wavelength is so large. And if you go back through the through the astral and the mental, the wavelengths become more refined, and so time is sensed much less than it is in the physical.
Yeah, that would apply especially in the three worlds of form. That's why the time would be different too in the spirit world. But here, the main reason it's timeless is because cause and effect in the atomic world happen at the same time. So, and you can kind of see this when you come up with an idea. Now think in your mind of an apple, okay? You cause that apple to materialize at the same time it appeared, okay? And this is the way it is in the higher worlds. If intelligence conceives of an apple, it's there at the same time the cause. In other words, the intelligence causes an apple the idea of an apple to materialize. The instant it conceives of it, it's there. Okay, so there's no time between cause and effect. Now we go down to the worlds of form, where there's actual form. You have a sequence of consciousness registering a difference between cause and effect. If I want an apple here, I got to go find a seed, plant it in the ground, wait for the tree to grow, and it might take a couple years before I can pick an apple off that tree. So there's a sequence of time that happens before I can have the apple in my hand. But in the higher worlds, anything that's conceived of is just instant. So there's no time between cause and effect. Cause and effect happen all at one time. That's why they say there's no duality there, is because up and down is the same time. Past and present is the same. There's no past and present. It's all, everything is happening at once. So it's called the eternal now. And it's hard for us to imagine what it would be like to dwell in these higher worlds where cause and effect happen at the same time. But the seeds of time are always with us. And so no matter where we are, because what is time was created from a place where there's no time. So our world that we're in now was created from a state of consciousness where there was no time and no space and no matter as we know it. So it's interesting to contemplate, and about boggles the mind to do this. So many people have reached a state where they have experienced what they think of as the eternal now, and everybody has different perceptions. So whether they really reach that state is maybe a matter of debate, because there's many states of consciousness, and oftentimes when people reach one state, they will think they've reached the ultimate high, whereas maybe they just reached a step or two above where we are now. So we tend to always are after the ultimate, but at the point we're at now, there's no ultimate for us. There's just the next step. I wrote this about creation. When you think of God creating the universe, the life, the purpose of God is like a great creative artist with one great paintbrush in its hand. And with that paintbrush, all there is made manifest. The hand which holds the paintbrush is the energy we call purpose that comes from timelessness. Without purpose, there could be no creation. For purpose is behind all there is. It is the motivating power of God. So there is a purpose that is generated out of the formless worlds, and it is like the the power that creates everything. The creative hand is purpose, the paintbrush is love, and the beautiful colored lights of creation are light. These three are the Trinity of God, projected by the one life, and are the powers behind all creation. Okay, so everything is set up. We have divine space. And Blavatsky says something interesting about space. She points out that there's no such thing as any place in space where there's nothing. There's something, she said there's something everywhere. Now, Joseph Smith said the same thing. He said in one of the scriptures he wrote, it says, there's no kingdom without space, and there's no space in which there's no kingdom. I've always been perplexed by that. Never heard anyone ever comment on that because it's quite deep. And Blavatsky says the same thing. She says, anywhere where there's space, there's something there, we just can't see it. And that something can be created from it. And scientists is beginning to find that out. They're finding all kinds of micro wavelengths of electrical patterns and magnetic things, all kinds of even gravity waves now they've finally discovered, which are infinitesimally small. And they're finding all kinds of waves in what we think of as empty space. And just think of your transmission when you make a phone call on your mobile phone. It connects up to some satellite through apparently empty space. And the voice you're hearing comes through apparently empty space. And so all this happens. So anyway, that's interesting how if and what that means. If there's no such thing as empty space, it means that the power of creation in the universe is just more infinite or unlimited than we can just imagine. Because it's amazing how much empty space is, what appears to be empty spaces between each star and each planet and each galaxy. There's so much that is just seems empty, but it's not empty. Yeah.
You know, JJ, Tesla said, said there was, no empty space, but he said it was filled with ether. And now I've heard some scientists describe it as a plasma.
Well, ether is a little bit different than plasma. Plasma is a state of matter like in the sun where it gets really hot, it creates a plasma. But scientists some time ago thought there was ether and that's what transmitted light. And then after a bunch of experiments, they couldn't find any ether anywhere. So they concluded that ether was a hoax, that it didn't exist. And now they're kind of changing their minds again. They're thinking, well, space is not empty. They're finding that out the more they research. And so scientists are a little bit coming around to the idea that maybe there is some type of ether out there that we have missed.
It's filled with dark matter. There's more dark matter than the matter that's visible.
Right, and they can't find that dark matter. They say, where is all this dark matter at? That there has to be more matter than we can see. I think it's like 99% of the matter they've calculated because of calculating the gravity in the universe and the motion of the galaxies, that there has to be a bunch of matter out there that we can't see. Where is it? And they can't find it.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Right.
Didn't they? I saw a video at one of my Theosophical classes that they showed that they sent up a probe, and they showed that the theory of dark matter. What they actually saw was filaments connecting everything that was considered dark matter. So it's like everything is connected to everything else.
Yeah, they're finding that out, that There's quite a few scientists for some years have thought that the universe is connected electrically, that all the different star systems and galaxies are connected by the electrical filaments and tentacles, so to speak. And that's been a pretty popular theory. It's not quite been mainstream, but it's catching on, getting more traction all the time.
You know, and there's also this thing that they're putting forward is that the Big Bang is an erroneous term. There was no Big Bang. That this universe evolved. There wasn't just one. It wasn't a one explosion deal.
Yeah.
That's another thing that's going about.
Scientists are starting to question a few things. If you question the Big Bang in ordinary scientific circles, you kind of looked on as a heretic, but there is a number of heretics out there that are, it's just like evolution. You have to go along with the way they define evolution. Like Blavatsky says, yeah, there's evolution, but it's different than Darwin talked about. And
right, it's not the scientific evolution. It's evolution, but it's not the scientific evolution that, you know, the standard scientific accepted evolution or theories rather.
Yeah, everything happens oftentimes. It happens scientifically, but things evolve different than scientists think. Science keeps finding surprises, and each surprise they find leads a little bit closer to the teachings of the ancient wisdom, which is interesting. And sooner or later, they will discover what ether is. Just a matter of time. Okay, we don't have a lot of time for another subject here, but any other comments?
I have something for consciousness to create something. I think there has to be something that predates or becomes before the thing being created. It's like the consciousness has to imagine, picture, a blueprint of what it's going to create. And to do that, it's first, before it even starts creating, it's got to invent a time and a spot, you know. It's like, if I put a spot here, that implies, oh, you got spots and you got here's, you know. There had to be something. There had to be a blueprint.
Right, and that was one more point I was going to make, which is interesting, is the fact that time, my theory on this is that time always exists, even if a person enters a state of timelessness, because time is a place where consciousness incarnates into. So we are incarnated into time right now. Because we're incarnated into time, into circumstances that create time, we're experiencing it. But if we leave, if we were to go to the higher formless worlds, we would be out of time. And we would be in a state of timelessness, but down in the worlds of time, time is still happening. So time still goes by, even for the lives that live in the formless worlds where there is no time. It's just not happening for them, but it's happening where lives are incarnated into time. It's kind of complex to think about and kind of makes your head spin, but so it's interesting. I think it's a real interesting thought to think of time as something that is always going on, but it's not always something a life form is incarnated into. This is why if we leave our body, if our consciousness leaves our body and is evolved enough to go into a high enough state, he can sense a state where there is no time. But time is still here and it's still passing. When he comes back down in his body and his normal consciousness, time is still there, time has passed. So time didn't go away. So in timelessness, time doesn't go away, he's just not experiencing it. We can experience it or not experience it depending on if you're incarnated in time or out of time. So it's thinking of time is a fascinating thought, and maybe it's one of the reasons I like time travel movies so much, like Back to the Future and stuff like that. Always been fascinated with time travel.
So you could say time is a movement of consciousness, so a perception of different focuses of consciousness.
Yeah, and in each form. So you have conscious focusing on some type of form that produces time. So yeah, it's a fascinating subject to contemplate. Okay, any other comments or questions before we wrap it up?
JJ, I've got a question.
Sure.
So if our souls are intelligent and our monad is a little bit more intelligent, why do we come down to earth a bit more dumber? What is the point of it?
Well, that was the next subject we were going to talk about, but we didn't have time to get to it. So
That's fine.
let's leave that question for next week. We'll start off with that question. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay,
You
so
sound way ahead.
remember that question, because that was the very next thing we were going to discuss. Okay, any other short questions?
The universe breathes. Right now, the universe is breathing out to the point where it doesn't, and it sleeps.
Right, the Hindus say that in the beginning God breathed and he breathed out, and if he were to stop breathing, the universe would disappear. So we better hope he continues to breathe for a while longer. So that's what they teach, according to something I read there. Okay, anything else? Okay, good group today, and glad to have you. We'll meet again next Sunday at 10 in the morning, all being well. And that time, have a good week and stay safe from the virus and don't get involved in any of these riots or anything.
Thank you. Good night.
JJ, bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Everyone, thanks.
Bye, everyone.
JJ.
Bye. Bye.
See you later.